That was the problem. It was the wrong setting. Okay. Never a dull moment with technology. Well, anyways, we're going to get going here. There's our agenda for the day, and we are the Branden Klayko Historic Preservation Forum. Just a little bit about Branden for those of you not familiar with him. He was very much a Louisville advocate, especially history. There's actually an alley dedicated to him in the Butchertown area. That's where you see it there. There's Branden there on the left. And one of his more favorite photographs with his father there, Al, who's with us here this morning. But anyways, we really miss Branden. He passed away in 2017, but we do a lot of events related to honor his legacy here, and very much appreciative of what he did in his short life for Louisville history and preservation. So without further ado, I want to introduce Ameerah Granger. She's in the Chickasaw neighborhood, and she will be discussing preservation efforts there. Ameerah.
Well, can I say something?
Yes, go ahead, Martina. Martina
County Neighborhood Planning and Preservation, also a member of the Louisville Historical. And I want to thank everybody for coming today. And I want to thank everyone, especially Ameerah and Allison, for coming at the last minute and for still speaking to me. Everything I do is last minute because I've got hands in a lot of time. Ameerah is the president of the Chickasaw Neighborhood Federation. And with any luck, okay. I'm not
We
sure
don't have a microphone this morning.
With any luck, in several weeks, Chickasaw will become the first urban neighborhood to become a preservation district in 22 years. And so I was so delighted when Ameerah agreed to come today. She didn't clamor and say, please let me speak. I begged her to speak because this is an example of a neighborhood that most of us in the community don't know about, that has worked very hard towards this. And she's going to talk about the process that led to this and how they may be the first in 22 years. Thanks.
And I'll get your slides up, Ameerah, in just a second. If you want to talk over by the camera. By the way, we do have coffee, not coffee. Unfortunately, our coffee order fell through the cracks this morning, but we do have donuts and other drinks in the back. Feel free. I do not want to take any of that stuff home today, so please take whatever you have.
So I'm trying to embrace actually being honest about how I feel sometimes. So I shared this morning with a new friend that my introvert was in full effect, and so I'm activating my extrovert right now, so I'm glad that we're getting the PowerPoint up. So again, my name is Ameerah. I grew up in the Newburgh neighborhood, actually in the H-Mart subdivision, which is on the maps if you're into that kind of thing. I used to take pride in telling people that. But as kids, we would joke on each other about where you're from. And a lot of times Newburgh had a lot of stereotypes or kind of critique from other kids from other sides of town. So anyway, those are just fond memories. So at one point in time, I did not want to stay with my grandparents anymore. I was raised by my grandparents, and they had a home in the West End. That's what I understood. Thank you. Okay, and so I said, well, can I live in the house? Because my granddad had rented to a lady who I felt like was family. I knew her name so long she had lived there and I used to go with him sometimes. He would do repair runs, but I didn't really understand the dynamics. And so in grad school, I did a research project around housing and perceptions of housing related to the tenant's perspective and the landlord's perspective. And that came from conversations my family talked about politics and religion at the dinner table. So where other people say, don't do that, I'm like, why not? And so with that, my family was speaking on items that you would have in a home when you're renting it to people and things that are like ridiculous. And Ameerah did not understand that that's just not what you do because that's not a good thing to offer because it'll get tore up, And so I just was like, this is an interesting thing to explore. So if I ever go back to work on my PhD, I will probably pick that research up because the surveys that I extended kind of spoke to that same thing, that there's an extreme difference of what people think if they are a renter versus if they are a landlord and have tenants. Some had some softer views and some had some hardline views, but it was definitely an interesting thing that I think we see play out in our communities, and we also see play out, I think, in our neighborhoods. So, Chickasaw, if you're not familiar, I know it's like, you can look at this later, maybe we can share this. So Chickasaw is towards the west part of the river we enjoy. Our boundaries are Broadway from 34th, now Lewis Coleman, and Lewis Coleman all the way down to the edge of Alpha Gardens, which I've seen some maps that kind of say different things. But if you imagine the railroad tracks that are there before Russell Lee Park, that's kind of the other side of that to the river. So that's Chickasaw over, on this side, you can see that closer. So again, I asked my family, can I move into the rental house that you had? And they were like, why would you want to live down there? And I was like, because I don't want to live here. I'm going to kill somebody if I stay here. So it was just good to just spread my wings and kind of see what it's like. And so even though I wasn't a full homeowner, I was kind of experiencing it from two different angles. Taking care of a property for my aging grandparents, but also leaning in the fact that they let me stay there for relatively free. Okay, so I just kind of paid for everything and didn't have to pay rent. But it caused me to reflect and think about where they came from. For my life, we always lived in Newburgh. 5615 was just the place I knew. So mama is mama, she has no first name. Daddy is daddy, you know, there's no history to them. And so it's like, because they're just in my world, right? And so then when you go places and people are like, T, or calling them nicknames, I'm like, who are you talking to? Like they have a broader existence. The same thing with where they came from. And so this home in Chickasaw, as I've been engaging with a lot of other preservationists and other historians, I've kind of come to review and reflect on my family's experience in a total different way. Things that I've heard, but I just didn't connect in that same way. And so this home in Chickasaw represented my family's planting of roots in their first home. And that's not something to be forgotten. They were able to, because of the work that they did, to buy their next home in Newburgh. But at the time, they came from Bowling Green, Kentucky. There was a relative who had a good, I guess, factory, or a lot of my uncles, great uncles were in the military, but they had a funnel pretty much of one person got established, brought other people into the city. People were able to get on their legs and take off. And I think a lot of us probably have that story in our families in some way. Which button am I going to press? Okay.
If you want me to, I can just, there you go. Is that better? It's this one right here. It's this one right here.
Okay, so with that being said, so learning more about my family, I guess it's like a dual process. Moving into an area and taking pride in the area. My granddad was one of those gentlemen on the street that we had a beautiful yard, and after we passed, a lot of neighbors would say, you know, I had to make sure I cut your granddad's yard right, because Mr. Granger didn't play. That's what they would say. And so I think about how there's little glitter from their spirit everywhere they went, and there's lots of that glitter with me. And for me to work on this effort with my neighbors and with other people.
Why don't I handle this? There you go.
I was just gripping the wrong part. Sorry, guys. My extrovert is like kicking the other one aside. So the point is, I came to have greater appreciation for the journey of my grandparents, and also it led me to want to know even more about their journey and the people around them. In Chickasaw, that home I learned recently, because different people, they may want to push people to sell. There's lots of times that people on the West End get postcards and calls urging you to sell your home at very cheap rates, and it's low grade disrespectful. And so in the last few years, we were reached out to by the city. They got a grant, and several meetings happened. We finally got on board, and we decided to pursue the project around National Register. and making Chickasaw potentially be on the National Register of Historic Neighborhoods. And so sometimes I would hear people, African Americans as well as others, say things like dismissive of the West End, dismissive of neighborhoods as though there's nothing there to value, nothing there to take note of, and that's just totally not true. But I think that many of us, whether you live in that area or you live outside of those areas, we have to reprogram ourselves. We have to purge that sometimes anti-blackness. Sometimes we have to purge that miseducation that we've gotten about what's where. The homes are of similar stock. The history is rich. And so we just have to really be brave enough to maybe question what's in our heart and minds and gauge whether or not we need to keep it there. And so with this partnership with the city, we interviewed or kind of looked at some various contractors to handle the application, and we went with Rory Krupp, and he did a really great job. And so COVID happened, hiring, firing, delays in the state, all these things happened, and so eventually the application was presented last year, and it was approved, and then it went to the national level, and it was approved. So we are a historic neighborhood on the national register. So in reading, that was just to share about this one slide there. So in reading some of Rory's report, a friend, maybe in another neighborhood, I don't know if you see this, but it was shared with me to look at stories that Rory put in the application, because to me it was just an 80-page application. It's like, wow, that's really great, thank you for that. But in reading it, it's really fascinating to kind of see some of the stories that he highlighted about Chickasaw, and for me to kind of understand better some of the neighborhood subdivisions, some of the groups that made things happen, many of the people that decided that were movers and shakers in this area, in this city, state, and region, as well as the nation. And so while we were working on the National Register, kind of waiting for that to mature, we were like, we need other protections. Like I mentioned, the postcards and other things that were coming at people, we wanted to put something in place, and some of us knew about preservation districts in other areas of town, and we were like, we need something with more teeth. I'm a Jurassic Park fan, got you guys. So, see, anybody love dinosaurs? Like, 2 people, that's fine. There's a scene in one of the movies and they're like, we need more teeth, okay, because you have the, so anyway, so we needed more teeth. That's how I would describe it. And so we wanted to pursue preservation, and so we had a multitude of many meetings at coffee shops and libraries and various places. And then when we got to a better place, we kind of approached various partners in the community to get help on what direction to go with that. And so luckily, the folks in Clifton and Michael Lear is here, they were agreeable as the last neighborhood to be successful in this effort to work with us pretty much as a mentor or big brother and to guide us through and give us advice as we pursued it. So while Clifton was going to big brother us in this, there's a lot of similarities in our neighborhoods. There are some differences in where they were at the time and where we are at the time, but the reality is we both needed this. And so some of the things that maybe they faced 20-something years, or maybe even 25 years ago in working on this are different. The city has changed, realities have changed, but in terms of what it has done for their area and what it does for other preservation districts, that's the thing that we look to have in Chickasaw. In the West End, the only other preservation area is Parkland's business district. And a lot of people will say, oh, Parkland. It's like, no, just that little T-bone strip of street is a preservation area. And so we're really excited, and I would say Chickasaw is very residential, but in trying to engage people, sometimes neighbors honestly have the same view of like, why are we doing this? Are we even eligible? And that's conditioning, you know, and we have to help people not be conditioned to that. Some of you may be familiar with the Dorhofer Mansion, am I saying it right? Well, and if not. So some of the inspiration here, and those are just pictures of our meetings. So a few different ones. We've been on Zoom, been at coffee shops, we've been in churches. So we've gone through some of the other elements that other preservation districts have looked at or that the city has, and just try to gauge what things neighbors really are interested in. So that's been a fascinating time. And then just looking at the guidelines that the city has and that Clifton has. And it's really, Clifton's version is really cool because it's very customized to Clifton. And it's probably more user-friendly than some of the other guidelines. So I have a few pictures here that I just want to show you that kind of lends to the reason. So there's an old, but gone, a new, and then an old, and what will happen with it. And so this here is one of, I think it was at one time a store. It was on the corner of Virginia and 36. Let's see, unfortunately, I'll say, the West End School had an idea to expand, and they were able to, at a very lofty price, buy out homes on that corner. So they attempted to buy 12 homes, I think. They were only successful in buying 11. One of those was in the land bank, so that's a whole other conversation. But they acquired those properties and leveled them in a project that hasn't gotten very far yet, but they leveled brick homes, historic buildings that were going to make way for them to have a playground. We appealed to them to consider doing something different, like doing their sporting events at Russell Lee Park, which is less than a mile away. Kind of doing something state-of-the-art there so the community could enjoy it, but also their students in the small amount of time they're at school could still be a part of the community and bring their wealth and ideas to a broader audience. But instead, so this building as it stands is gone. I just like it because it's black and white. I think that makes it kind of cool. So something new, in Chickasaw Park, there's an overlook. It's really nice, and if you ventured around town during the floods recently, I heard that it was really interesting that the water was not so far away. So it kind of sits up high there, but yeah, it's a really neat little place. And then something that's still there, this was once a church, obviously. I think it was built in like 1908 or 1902. So it's really cool. It has this little brick out front. Not sure what's going to happen to this. The group that owns it is kind of dragging a bit with their work on it, but they at least keep the grass cut, and everyone pressures them to do something with it. So a lot of people envision maybe a restaurant or offices or things like that. I think something that comes from preservation, where you can still use that same structure and put different types of things, just have a different imagination of ideas. So this is a slide that was in the National Register application, where Mr. Krupp found that's the recent photo that he took of this home, but you can see here where it was for sale originally. And I think that is on maybe Southwestern Parkway, but since I can't see it right now, but just to keep in mind some of the cool things, especially I know this neighbor was very delighted to see that their home was in the application and that they had the historic reference. So, and I think if anyone's researching their family story and their home, that's always something nice to see. And so in our area, at least people can start to look at what the home used to look like and what it could look like, and if they want to restore it or if they want to do work on it under the preservation guidelines, potentially, we would ask they maintain that exterior facade. And appreciating the different conversations, learning about, I don't know, different mortars and dormers and all these different terminologies that I honestly never thought I would consider. So now I appreciate it. I can walk through different neighborhoods. I'm like, oh, look, just, picking out different things. So even appreciating the work here that this church is working on to restore all that kind of beauty and structure, even with pillars, and whether or not people restore them in the same way that they could have looked initially, that beauty is something to recognize. So this is just a row of homes, and it's just kind of even though it's a simple home, this is one of the simpler homes. And I shouldn't say so. The beauty there in terms of trying to get folks to recognize that this is something that can be modernized and still have that same structure. Algonquin Gardens, just another piece that was included in the application. So some of the subdivisions that were maybe a big deal in, say, the 40s, 50s, and 60s are different now in terms of what people maybe call it. But it was definitely eye-opening for me to kind of learn more about our community as we move forward with this process. And I do want to mention, and I feel like I'm kind of talking for a long time, Something that I noticed, and I want to mention here, in reading the application, they mentioned code enforcement and its effects. And so in Chickasaw, like probably everybody's neighborhood, you have little pockets of different folks. And so we have a Westover subdivision that's a really big active group, a lot of homeowners in that section of Chickasaw. And they're more HOA minded. There are a lot of renters in Chickasaw, as in every community. And so the broader part of Chickasaw may have different viewpoints on things, or maybe aren't as persnickety about how tall your grass is, or if you put your garbage can up by a certain hour. So, things like that. But with that, you have a push to have code enforcement ask people or encourage people to follow up. Well, now that that has been stirring, it has maybe an unintended consequence. Okay, so you have neighbors maybe calling for it, other neighbors saying, let's do this in a smart way. At the same time, there's a historical precedent that was found in this application, and now there's a program that's happening where code enforcement is circulating in the West End every 3 days. To me, that's very problematic. It's not that it's wrong to circulate the community, but that you're targeting a certain area only. I have an issue with that. If you're going to circulate every 3 days, then you tour the city. But if you're only hitting these 9 neighborhoods that are already under some other tax increment financing elements and other wages on their community, this to me seems like another cut. So they said death by 1,000 cuts. So this is another couple of cuts. And so with that, and going back to those hands from the beginning, I would hope that as neighbors within our neighborhood, that's where I put pressure on my neighbors and other neighborhood groups to kind of consider how it impacts one another, but then also that we reach across neighborhoods and across boundaries. And so we greatly appreciate those in Clifton supporting us and really just being there through this process, but additionally that we stand up for each other. And I know that many of us have that on our heart, but just that we actually do it, not just be like passive with it. I've gone to different BOZA hearings, and I may be going for something in Chickasaw, but I stick around and listen to what's going on. And there have been times that I put in a comment for another neighborhood, and I had no idea about it until I got there. And those are the types of things I'm saying. When they're trying to put a Publix in on Tucker Station Road, and I was there, it's like, I'm gonna speak on it. You can come to the West End where we need a grocery store. But they didn't want to do that. So just, if you want to lend your energies, I definitely would encourage you to do so with a neighbor that cares and to just broaden our ideas. I think it's the same thing if I have judgments on other communities that I'm not familiar with, that I have to broaden that and be open to it too. I enjoy going to restaurants on Goss Avenue, and maybe wouldn't have done that when I was a kid, but now it's like, let's just explore and learn more. And so I hope that we can all kind of do that as we move forward. One other thing. I did have a slide about the cemetery, but I will say, hopeful that our historic status and our preservation guidelines eventually, when I see us being successful, I'm going to speak it into fruition, we'll have greater protection for the Greenwood Cemetery, where you can have provisions for site behaviors that you have on sites where you don't remove different artifacts. That's something that I definitely think could be helpful, and I know our next speaker is going to talk about a couple of different things, but I just want to kind of put that out there for cemetery love. And also, I have some postcards, and I know everyone here might not be able to, but if you would like to fill out a cute little Louisville postcard, there's different theme cards to send to the planning office, to Savannah Gar, and let her know that you support us in our preservation efforts. I appreciate it. You don't have to take it home. I have stamps. So just to say. And actually want to take a picture of them too, because there's concern in case the mail doesn't get where it needs to get. But if you're willing and interested, I have enough postcards that you can pick a cute little Louisville card and support another Louisville neighbor. And with that, I thank you.
we need to get things. And by the way, speaking about going from different neighborhoods, not long ago, I was on a motor coach trip bringing some East Enders over to McAlpin Lock and Dam and into the Portland neighborhood to show them some history there. And we had some extra time. And so we drove down Northwestern Parkway into the Chickasaw neighborhood, and these were East Enders, and they could not believe the beautiful area that was, the beautiful homes. I could just hear them talking amongst themselves like we didn't know this was here. So maybe we ought to sponsor some bus trips from the East End into the West End to let them show it. It's a beautiful area. And I'm there all the time. And anyway, so that gave me a thought on all that. So anyways, let's, Alice, how do we connect to, is your laptop on? I need to plug this HDMI in. I hope we can do that. It's so thin.
No, I can't.
Well, they set up, so it's great. Please come to the west, but please don't come as a predator. Just saying.
Thank
This
you.
is a new Mac and it doesn't take HDMI.
It doesn't have HDMI?
Public hearing.
Oh my gosh.
That's a
Wow. Oh, it takes the little thin,
yeah.
the
That's
thin
the electrical.
C,
I did
the
not
USB.
bring. That just plugs it in for power.
Oh wow! So it doesn't even connect. Do you have a USB of your presentation?
No.
I always bring USBs just in
No,
case.
I don't.
So you don't have a USB? I could have plugged it in. Oh man! Well, this ain't going to go very well, is
What's the
it?
matter?
Her laptop doesn't take
Ask people to spool it
HDMI.
up and I'll put it on the thing.
Oh, shoot.
What was that again?
Just ask people to gather around and I'll hold it up. So
Oh yeah, maybe
Oh, okay,
maybe you can
yeah.
talk in front here and just kind of
Maybe just hold it up. Yeah.
So yeah, go ahead.
Code enforcement calls made by residents asking for some tighter checks led to a blame game, and so that is happening now. And so I just wanted to point that out, that there's like this repeating of history with this CREST program and them coming around every 3 days. When neighbors are trying to just improve the area, it's turning into a way to seize property, and that happened in the late 50s and 60s.
So technology constantly is changing, and this is some new technology we just learned about, is that these new laptops do not have HDMI connectors to it.
Yeah, I have the converter for it at home, but it never occurred to me. that
Yeah,
I
and we don't have a
need that.
converter for this here. So I wish they would stop changing technology. It is driving us nuts. So it requires a whole different adapter, which we do not have. We just found out that this is existing. So Alice is going to hold up her laptop as she talks and just kind of goes in that manner. So sorry about that. You'll have to
So
deal
why
with this in
don't
the
we gather
future.
up a little closer?
And we're not taking up a
I also
collection
don't
this
have
morning.
a big, strong, booming voice. So if you want to see what's on here, I think you're going to have to come up closer.
Yeah, that is really unfortunate. Yeah, you want Ted to hold. But yeah, technology is constantly changing. They're coming up with these smaller USB ports and all of that. And
So the title of my presentation is The Remains of the Day, Reclaiming Sacred Spaces. So this is more of adventures in reclaiming sacred spaces. Truly, if you want to see up close, you're going to have to move up because it's going to take way too long to go completely around. So, first of all, let's see here. Who we are and where we are. This is the far east, northeast corner of Jefferson County, right at Oldham County. The red line, if you can see it, is Wolf Pen Branch Road, which is a historic area that runs from Harrods Creek all the way 5.5 miles to what I call the small city of Norton Commons. So in 2010, Wolf Pen Preservation, which is a very small 501c3 charity, was asked to help restore a local cemetery. There's an old mill there that was built by William Postlethwaite in 1823, and he is buried in this cemetery, which was about 50 feet by 50 feet. It contained 2 stones, William Stone and a larger sort of monument stone of some other early settlers of the area. The area was settled in the late 1700s, so it's pretty old. So starting out, we've got 2 cemetery stones set way apart, but they're running in parallel lines. So knowing nothing about how to restore a cemetery, I went and got a piece of rebar, which is a heavy metal thing with a handle. And after every rainstorm after work, I would go up and I would start next to Mr. Postlethwaite, and I would start probing about 4 to 6 inches down. And all of a sudden I'd hear a clink, 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 and I knew I'd hit a stone. So I dug up the stone, or I had help digging up the stone, reset it in the ground so it was above the ground, and I went on with this process. This went on for weeks and weeks and weeks, and it's some of the most fun I had had in a long time. And as it progressed, now I've lost the presentation, what's going on here? Come on. As it progressed, I began to realize that some of the stones were appearing in rows running parallel to Mr. Postlethwaite and the DeHavens. So I called up Laurie Stahlgren, who is now, I think, with the Landmarks Commission, but she was a historic archaeologist with the state then. And she said, are the rows running north-south? And I said, yes, they are. And she said, that's because in the Christian tradition, you want to rise up facing east on Judgment Day. So that kind of gave me chills to hear that. So in toto, we unearthed, in addition to the 2 stones we had, we unearthed 39 more stones. And what was interesting to me about the stones is that they were all of similar size. They looked like a gravestone. Some had an inverted V for the top, some had a curve. One was completely square, but this tall, or mostly square. And I think what they did was they got a field stone that kind of looked like a gravestone and either used it that way or modified it a little bit to have it look more like a gravestone. So then Laurie's group of archaeology students came out from U of L, and they mapped and measured and documented everything that was there and presented us with a nice formal map of the cemetery. So we have completely flown by our pants, as we say, very casual attitude and approach to restoring this cemetery. So the next one that came up in our area was the Rufus Stokes cemetery. This really, it's hard to see, but Rufus Stokes was an African-American man who owned property on Wolf Pen Branch Road in 1913, according to this title atlas. And on that property was the beginnings of the Stokes family cemetery. So here are a couple pictures. The top one says, Dear Minnie Mother Stokes, and I can't read her dates, but I think she died in the early 1900s. The bottom one is Dear Wife Stokes, and she died in 1967. The cemetery is set on a slight hill, so the older stones are at the top and the rest are working their way down to Wolf Pen Branch Road. So here we have the man in the middle is Arnie Ziegert, who owns the property now. He's always been friendly with the Stokes and Dunbar descendants. The guy on the left is Scott Reed, who is our council person. And on the right is Martin Dunbar, who is a descendant of the Stokes family. So I think Arnie was the one who had the idea that maybe Wolf Pen Preservation, Arnie's on the board, should help out the Stokes family and maybe write some of the stones and dig for more stones and all of that. And Arnie's always good about saying, let's contact Scott. And sure enough, Scott was all on board, and he said, I can probably get you some grant funds to help with the supplies or whatever you line up the labor. So we said, okay, that sounds like a great idea. One of our young board members, who's all into preservation, said, why don't you go down and talk to Andy Harpole, who runs the Eastern Cemetery downtown, the one that is very overburied with too many burials. So Andy said, oh, come on down and you can learn how to do this. Well, in medicine, they say, see one, do one, teach one. With Andy, it's do one, and then you know it. So luckily, 3 of the group that went down were guys, and so they could provide the labor. I took the pictures and got water for them. So basically, it's a very complicated, rather long process. It took 3 hours or more to do this, but the first trick is to dig the stone out very carefully so that you're not too close to the stone and you risk marking up some surface that should not be marked up. Then you redig the hole, put in a layment underneath, you put in gravel, you level, 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 more gravel, more level, 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 and then you get to the part where you can reset the stone. And there are all kinds of products. This looks like liquid lead or something to me. I don't know what it is. But you put this product down on the level stone and then put the vertical stone on top of it. They're using a product called D2, which is a liquid that removes the vegetation and bacteria and that kind of growth from the stone. I'm not showing you anything, I'm sorry. And in the middle of the stone, you can kind of see that it's lightening up, so it does not destroy the stone. So you don't want to take Ajax and a wire brush to a stone. So now we've done it informally. We've learned how to put it all together. This was in 2019. We were going to do it right in the fall, as soon as all the vegetation was down in November. And we, for whatever reason, didn't get to it, and then there's COVID. Then I lose Martin's number, then I get involved in other things. But I have reconnected with the Dunbar family just recently, and we're going to do something later in the fall. So now we've learned a lot more. This is an example of evaluating a cemetery. This was when they were putting in the East End Bridge, and they had to evaluate all the historic properties and structures in the area so that they could evaluate for damage from blasting if there were to be any damage. So the Alice and Barrickman Cemetery was formally examined by the Kentucky Transportation Cabinet, and they sent people out to look. The point of this slide is it's a professional document. It's 26 pages long. You can also see some of the woody overgrowth that's there. That it's done in the winter when you really don't have the foliage and the snakes and the ticks and the poison ivy to contend with. So this is one of the pages that documents the, 29 formal headstones that are in the cemetery that were professionally prepared back even in the 1800s, because this was a wealthy family. And they did a complete evaluation, a description of the stone, good condition, bad condition, the name on it when they died, how many people were husbands, wives, all of that was documented. But in the area that's outside this fenced area, we have found, and they found, you can barely see it, but that is probably an enslaved person's headstone. Now, again, and they may not have used footstones, they did not dig anything up, so whether this stone goes down 1.5 feet or so to really be a substantial marker or not, we don't know. This is an example of another one. I think some of that looks like it might have been moved because the bottom half is a little bit lighter, as though it hasn't been underground as long. But that's where we are with that. So in going forward with preservation, anybody who knows anything about historic cemeteries knows that you can't count on the boundaries of a cemetery. Even though it may have a fence around it, even though the deed book from 1880 says it's where it is, you cannot count on that. And this, unfortunately, is going to be a little hard to see. This is the map, and I'll show it around. This is the map they did, and what is really essential is that the family part is the small square at the bottom with the marked stones. And look at the area that is reserved for the enslaved. All these stones up here are the enslaved, probably. And what I can't show you too easily is, but I'll tell you about it, around the area that's the family area, there are none of those stones. And that tells me these are not random field stones that just happen to be sort of jutting up. And the most important part is that the area is huge. It's just huge. We then thought, this was this year, we've been there a number of times, we thought we've got to do something about cleaning this up. I have a neighbor who grew up there, he knows every bit of history, he's an arborist, he has a wood chipper. He said, we need to get some people. I said, let me call the local church. I got a hold of this Boy Scout leader, and I said, do you need a project? Well, we might be interested. I told him what it was. They came out. The leader looked at the project. He said, yeah, you know, it'll take a while, but we'd be glad to do it. It was early March, so we had enough time before all the critters and creatures came out and leaves. We had some other neighbors who would be willing to help. The Boy Scouts cannot do a project, an Eagle Scout or other project, for a private entity, but they can do it in association with like a 501c3, a charity. So we thought, okay, we'll sponsor it, they'll do it, they have their own insurance, they will not use power equipment, they will bring their own supervisors. You know, it just seemed like a great thing to do. Well, the owner of this particular cemetery owns 25 acres and hopes to make a small shopping center like the Paddock Shop on it eventually. But we've chatted before about that, and Wolf Pen Preservation Association says we can only support residential. You know, we can't support commercial. But I called him up and I said, hey, you know, this has come up, we'd like to do this, we've got the Scouts, they have their insurance, we have our own adults, you're welcome to attend. You know, it's just, we're not trying to curry favor, we're just trying to do something nice for history. And he said, it sounds okay, double check on the insurance issue, because of course that would be huge. And I said, I will, and I'll call you back. And he said, I'll talk to my partner. And so I called back to confirm, hey, guess what? I left a message, you know, we've got the insurance, it's all covered, we can do it soon, just let me know what your partner said. I never heard a word. I left multiple messages, sent some texts, never heard a word. So there we are, now we're down to our last cemetery. This is our problem child. And maybe you all can, what is it they say about take the support that you get from the room. I'm going to show this twice. This is property near me. This is an area of 11 acres they want to subdivide, and in this corner is a cemetery. This is 11 acres they want to subdivide, and in this corner is a cemetery. Divide cemetery. The good news is they want to put in 1 acre lots with 1 house per acre. R1 zoning, which is the lowest zoning you can get that's residential in the county. Much as we wish they'd leave it like it is or break it into 2 parts, they're not. So, but we can't complain. But what this little message says, this is on Logic Map. It's a map that Louisville uses to plot where properties are and their owners, etc. Parcel .03410 acres, which is about 1,500 square feet, the location, and then owner unknown. So I know the owner of the property, and she came to me because I had written to Metro Planning and said, you know, this cemetery needs a formal evaluation because the lots are one of them is going to go right up next to it. There has to be access for the public, and the boundaries need to be defined. So she came to me and said, I don't know why I should pay for this because I don't own the property. And I said, in my meek, tactful voice, she already owns all that property, so it's not like she's making a huge investment here. And she said, well, I shouldn't have to pay. And I said, well, I think you're going to make a really big profit when you sell the 9 houses, and maybe, you know, $4,000 or $5,000 for a formal evaluation really isn't that much. You know, well, she didn't say much to that. So here is that cemetery. There's a central stone that belongs to Mr. Miller. Looks like it might have been repaired at one time. The fence in the back is an adjoining property. The fence on the right is Wolf Pen Branch Road. Now we're outside the fence, and you can see there are a couple of little stones there. I can't really use my pointer to show you, but there's one there. And then down here is where are the yellow lines? Here is the Wolf Pen Branch Road. So here's the exterior border, the cemetery stones, and it's right close to the road. So if we can't trust the border on the right hand, the north fence, how are we supposed to trust the borders on the other three sides? I was doing research on another old house out near Norton Commons. And Russell Chamberlain is a man who wrote a book, self-published. He started it in about 1950, and he didn't publish it till 1994. And it talks about the early settlement of Harrods Creek in the Wolf Pen area, and it's fascinating stories handed down about the slaves, the pioneers, the immigrants, and the Indians, because they still had to battle Indians here in the late 1700s. And this paragraph says, referring to Miller, "The family cemetery, which borders on Wolf Pen Branch Road on its northern edge, contains several graves besides those of John and Christina, but only one other marker is legible at this time, April of 1950. It is marked E.M. Other graves in the cemetery are unmarked, but known to be those of Martin Ring, who at one time owned the Wolf Pen Mill, Mike Rogan, Peter Hope, and some of the Tollers, as well as a number of Negro slaves who were buried on the eastern edge of the plot." That's the edge that's right on this woman's property. So I think when you take that information plus this wonderful map, thank you Transportation Department, that shows, the borders are not real. I have sent that information to the city recently. I have not heard back yet, but I think it proves that when you're saving a cemetery, you need to look beyond the borders. That's it.
Great. Well, excellent. Any questions on the cemetery or with Ameerah?
I've got something for Ameerah. Ameerah, 22 years ago, when Clifton was looking to become a historic preservation district, a lot of our neighbors felt, well, I live in a shotgun house. That's not historic. I remember our neighbors on Rastetter said their red brick homes on Rastetter, they said, well, these were built in the 1950s. It's not historic. Well, actually, shotgun houses are incredibly historic. I live in one. But also, the neighbors that live on Rastetter with their red brick house, they're the epitome of mid-century architecture. And what was interesting, sometimes it was exasperating, but what was something from our heart is when our neighbors learned about the history of the neighborhood, but also the significance of their home. The Camelback, shotgun house, the bungalow, and that is how we evolved to become a preservation district. Initially, it was to prevent people from tearing down the houses and stuff. But then when our neighbors came to appreciate the importance of where their home is and the significance, and we are repurposing these structures over again, because the most green and sustainable building structure is one that's already there. And I'm just thinking of John Veronese, who took a former gas station and created a restaurant out of that. And so we in Clifton, when we come to visit Chickasaw, it warms our heart because you are going through the same process we have. Our neighbors didn't understand, they didn't have the history as to why is this part of Louisville Metro important to us neighbors as well as Louisville Metro altogether. In October, we had a huge explosion, plant explosion, and in the neighborhood, Nady Williamson. My house is 800 feet from the explosion. And Landmark staff, they were the first, after the explosion, they were the first department that reached out to us and said, whatever the neighbors need in regards to a certificate of appropriateness, and like their staff was going to be there to expedite anything that comes through to them, which they have, by the way. And the interesting thing is after the explosion, after we got over the shock of the explosion and we started to clean up, is we have our preservation guidelines involved regarding the exterior of our buildings. And so we are maintaining the fabric of our neighborhood even though we had a disaster of an explosion. last night, I thought we were going to have a tornado. If a tornado had touched down in any preservation district, the rebuilding of that preservation district of that neighborhood would follow the guidelines and the fabric of the neighborhood be maintained. What I love about Chickasaw, when I'm there, and you're always so gracious inviting us, is you have the fabric of your neighborhood that's very distinctive, and it's very hometown. One of the pictures that you had showed a house, and they said chain link fence in the front yard. The Clifton neighborhood, Clifton Historic Preservation District, we're the only ones that allow chain link fences, because when we became a preservation district 22 years ago, we are not at all Old Louisville or Cherokee Triangle, the highfalutin ones. We're just a working class folk. And chain link fences are important to us, and that's a deal breaker. And so when we wrote our preservation guidelines, we actually included chain link fence. And that's what tickles me when I go into the Chickasaw neighborhood and I see the treasures that you have, and thinking, yes, with your leadership and the folks that are coming on board, is they're looking at the fabric of the neighborhood and to maintain the fabric into the future. And also, just because of building, if you're building something, it doesn't have to look like it's an old building. You always build within the time. So across the street from me, I have a shotgun house that was built in 1910, and in 2010 they built a Olympic-sized swimming pool. So that's what.
We only have 5 minutes
Oh,
left. We have to be out by 10:30. There's another group coming out. I did want to get John Gildebloom, who made a special effort here today. And John, if you would like to say a couple of words about preservation. John's been out of town for a while, and he was gracious enough to stop by. And we only have 5 minutes, John, so hopefully you can say what you have to say, but we'll get whatever you got there. Yeah, this St. Philip Neri, they've got groups one after the other today into this facility. I said we'd be out by 10:30.
Hi, everybody. I'm a preservationist, and I became a preservationist when I got my wife pregnant. And now, why would you say that you should value preservation? Well, for 4 years we were in Houston, and we tried pills, we tried surgery, we tried different sexual positions. We went down to South America and met with a voodoo guy. Nothing worked. Finally, the doctor said, why don't you get out of Houston? It's too dangerous, it's too wild, it's too crazy, it's not working here for you. You need to go to a calm place, and you know what you need to do? You need to go buy an old house and fix it up. And I said, wow, that's one of my dreams, like San Francisco painted lady. And I went there to Louisville, and we bought a place at 1346 South First Street. And we started fixing it. And right before my wife died, she said the happiest moment in our life besides her son was renovating an old house. It was such a joy. It was so beautiful. It was so lovely and exciting. And from that knowledge, which is what I always wanted to do from San Francisco, I studied preservation. I studied why. And one of the things about Louisville is that because the preservationists have maintained a hold on a lot of historic properties, there's a real correlation between preservation and affordability. And that's really important. The other thing that I want to point out too, when I was working with Mr. Albert Gore in the White House and others, was the fact that wealth building is all about home ownership. And one of the great discrepancies I see in Louisville is the fact that if you look at west and east, the average cost of housing right now in the St. Matthews, Highlands area is $465,000. But over in West Louisville, it's far less. It's $145,000 for home ownership. And home ownership is all about wealth building. And one of the things that we've discovered too is that preservation is the people that renovate the places, build the roofs, put the gutters in, fix, renovate, do the painting and so on, are the ones that can make some pretty good money from there. And in fact, 30% of the people who do preservation work in those houses are minorities. Another 70% are, of course, whites. And another thing is, 70% of them, sorry about that, is people without high school educations. It's a great looking job and so on. I'm sure you've met up with people like that. So I like that. I also, I was here when we were buying houses in Old Louisville. The first house I bought, that house at 1346 South First, we had no money. We had credit cards. And we bought it for $36,000. Two-story Victorian, 1346 South First. Today it's worth $465,000. And it's a grand house. I did a great job on the renovation. But then we started buying houses, me and Patty, with our baby and so on, in the Highlands. And these houses were going for $80,000 for a two-story, and another house going for $100,000, another house going for $130,000, $140,000. And all I needed to do was put down $5,000 down, show that I had a job, show that she was a JCPS teacher in West Louisville, and so on. And it's a great investment. It's so powerful. And in the end, and I'm embarrassed to say this, we made literally millions of dollars. And we have a wealth of $4 million in housing that we now own in, where I've had to move to, in Scottsdale, Arizona, and in Phoenix. And we have housing here too. But you know what? Because of the way the tax laws work and so on, we don't pay a single dime. We do it by 1031s and so on, where we can take that wealth and build it and so on. So I think housing is a great investment. I think preservation is wonderful. There's something cosmic about it, spiritual about it. I like the fact, very much, that people lived there 100 years ago and had babies there, children there, and so on. It's just something amazing. And some of you know about my book, Chromatic Homes, about fixing up your home, making it look good and everything like that, is very, very, very important and adds value. People like, it's called a good look from the windshield of your car. You see something bright. And that's why number one tourist attraction in San Francisco is not the cable cars or Fisherman's Wharf, but people go to see these painted ladies. They want to see the Grateful Dead house. They want to see the Jefferson Airplane house. They want to see where Osley cooked his LSD, and so on and so forth. And that's the same thing I was trying to argue in my book. And it's cheap. It's the cheapest way to fix up your house, fix up the interior. I disagree with one of the comments made about we need to get building inspectors off our backs. Actually, when you're putting money into a house and the house next door to you is falling apart and so on, you do want a building inspector to go in there and do something. And it's very important. The only time I've been hassled by a building inspector is when some of the tenants, a bunch of cheerleaders that rented out my house, left a whole bunch of beer cans around the place. And they fined me and they said, you know, you've got to clean up the beer cans and so on. And
Just a few more
okay, a few
minute
more
or
minutes
two.
and I'll wrap it up?
Yeah.
How am I doing so far?
Yeah, we're past 10:30, so.
Okay, ready? Okay, wait. So anyway, I have a new book. It's called Climate Chaos. It's endorsed by Pope Francis, who wrote the subtitle to it. And it's all the chapters that were written. And one of the reasons why West Louisville is doing so poorly in terms of is the pollution. You have 75,000 pounds of pollution flowing in there, hurting school, education. Lifespan is 12 years less, we all know that. And one of the things they've done is the most powerful people have basically gotten rid of the Center for Sustainable Urban Neighborhoods, which I ran, and that's one of the reasons why I retired and get that. You can get this book, all the stories in there, for $30, and I got lots of brochures on it. We'll be around. Thank you very much. I love Steve Weiser.
Okay, that's fine. Let's let this lady, yes.
I appreciate your comment about the pollution and hope that you help lead some of the efforts and the work that needs to be done to
Thank you.
protect those neighborhoods you want people to invest in. I encourage you to do that. And thank you, Ameerah and Alice.
Alice.
You injected a spiritual component to the work that you do. And it's just so refreshing. from our past that are impacting preservation efforts today. I am looking for people who know about George Wright's book, Life Behind the Veil. Have any of you read that?
I'm very familiar with it, yes.
I am looking for folks interested in reading that and discussing that as soon as possible, because it is so revelatory about the patterns that we see impacting our preservation efforts today. So anybody that is interested in reading that and being part of a dialogue, please let me know. Martina and Ameerah know how to get in touch with me. I appreciate you guys telling me about this. It's been so interesting. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay,
Yes.
anyway, this is going on YouTube. Can we get a big applause for all this?
Great.
Thank you, and I'll